excited to be here with everyone. And if, as you may have guessed, my name is Zayne Turner. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce. And in true Salesforce fashion, as we saw this morning, before I get into what in the heck just happened, I want to remind you to make any purchasing decisions based on our currently available, completely awesome technology, not any of the future-looking things that are also completely awesome that I may be showing you in just a few minutes. So, some of you who saw me talking earlier today about building on the Lightning platform saw this slide, and the animations were a little bit more beautiful then, I'll admit. But we're all here because we're builders of apps. And when you think about building apps, especially building apps on the Salesforce platform, the reason you come to events like this is because you're constantly thinking about where can I add the most value? Where are my skills the most needed? Where can I make the most impact? And so behind me, we have sort of a spectrum of the things that modern apps tend to need these days, from security to, I don't know, maybe a UI so people can see your app, all the way through access and identity. And so with some platforms, you know, you can only get at these things with code. Let's see if we can. Yeah, there we go. Now that's the next one. But with Salesforce, of course, we give you more options because you can use no code and code to do these. And the line of when you should be using code and when you should not be using code continually moves. And in fact, it moves 3 times a year. Yes, right? And so not only is this line moving 3 times a year, we're kind of adding a bunch of other stuff all the time, right? This is actually more what it looks like these days. Dynamic lightning pages are in the mix. We have AI. We have something called external services. Oh, but we also have traditional integration. There's this thing called DX that's out there that apparently we should all know about and be using. So it's constantly changing. And who in this room has felt a little overwhelmed by the amount of change in the ecosystem at any point in time? Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about if things are constantly changing, if we're constantly having to change what it is we know and where it is our skills are the most effective, then what does it mean to be an innovator? And what does it mean to innovate? So, I thought it might be helpful to first talk about, well, what is innovation? And I want to start talking about innovation by talking about what I think it's not. So I think that innovation is not, if this is going to click for me. Oh, there we go, 2 things at once. It's not a destination. It doesn't have nice weather. You can't visit there. It's not a place you get to. Innovation is not an end state. It's also not once you know everything under the sun there is to know. Innovation is also not being perfect. It's not comfortable. And it's not always recognizable. So here you go, a list of what innovation is not according to me. So what is innovation? I think innovation is what happens while you're doing other things. It's the side effect. It's a side effect of trying a lot of different things and failing a lot. I think innovation is often flawed when it shows up, and you're going to definitely see some flaws in a few minutes. It's often risky because you're trying something new. And I think innovation is often what we call something after it happens. We recognize it later. When the experiment turns out well, and you think, yes, that's innovation. So, I want to talk to you about how innovators build. Because I think innovators, more than knowing all the things there are to know, keeping up with the latest technology and being able to use it is about having a certain mindset. And I think innovators build with 3 things in mind. I think innovators build with why. I think innovators build with courage. And I think innovators build with joy. So I want to show you that in the app I just built and see what it can look like to build with a why and with courage and with joy. So let's hop into some code. Woo! Okay, so as you can see, I built a little app. It's a gorgeous little app. It's a Keynote app. And thanks to my colleague Philippe, it's even got a little bit of gorgeous custom branding right here. We are in a Summer 18 org, so there's all kinds of new things here. And you saw me launch it from Visual Studio Code, right, from my IDE. So this is a Scratch org. So I'm using DX. And the reason I'm talking to you about all of this is because when I thought about coming here to talk to you all, what I wanted to do, which was going to be no problem at all, I was like, okay, I have 40 minutes, and by the end of it, everyone in the room will be an expert in building in the latest Lightning technologies, and they will be completely comfortable with Salesforce DX. Right? Yeah. Just set that bar. And then about 10 days ago, when I was like, oh, have you finished your presentation yet? I was like, okay, maybe this won't happen. So what I decided to do instead was, wouldn't it be great if the presentation I want to give uses some of the latest in Lightning technology and also uses Salesforce DX? And in fact, beyond just using those things, shows what I'm talking about in terms of courage and all of those things, and is available for you to get. So, just in case you missed some of the code, or if you want to look at it later, this private repo will be made public right after this presentation, and I have a bit.ly link that you can get to it as well. But you can go look at all my terrible and maybe sometimes accidentally great code for yourself. So, this app is 2 tabs, as we can see. We have our Launchpad, and you just saw the magic of the Launchpad. And it has an assembler, which lets you upload presentation files. And then in my favorite part, as you saw my walk-on song, it lets you decide what sort of mood you're in. Or as we saw, I felt like dancing. Or if you're feeling like rocking out, there's another option for you. So, it helps you put together your presentation, and once you've done some assembling over here, then of course we have our Launchpad. So let's dive into the code. Not in the slides. That was my backup. Okay, so here you can see I was working in my terminal. So this is Visual Studio Code for those of you that haven't seen it before. An announcement we're going to be making in summer 18, this is where that safe harbor part comes in, is that we are no longer supporting the Force.com IDE in the same way. And that's because of Salesforce DX. Because we want you to be able to use your IDE of choice, the tools you want to use, and connect to our tooling no matter what, okay? So Visual Studio Code is the IDE that I'm using now. And if we go down here to extensions, this little box, if you, like me, have no idea what any of these symbols means, the ugly box is where you find extensions. And you can see there's a whole list of extensions, all authored by Salesforce. So you can download these extensions to turn Visual Studio Code into something that understands how to talk to Salesforce. So I want to show you my project, and I'm going to close out of some of these things because there's a lot going on. But basically, I have all my folders here. That's everything that that app contains are in these folders. I have some branding assets. I have some Lightning components. I have some Apex classes. I have custom tabs. It's a pretty simple app, and you're going to see it as well on GitHub. But I want to show you this Lightning component, this presentation helper. This markup right here is where the magic just happened. That was my one tab that was my Launchpad, is this one component. And the reason I'm showing you this is because, first, I want to show you Lightning. And I want to show you that this component is pretty simple. It is literally just controlling the layout. I have a Lightning layout thing with 2 items. We saw that was 2 columns. And then I have a Lightning button that is that glorious green button that let us get the party started, right? And all it's doing is firing this one action, this kick off all action. And if we go look at that controller, we can see that what I'm doing is I'm reaching down into my component and I'm grabbing those child components, that checkbox list of the I feel like dancing or I want to rock out, all of those things. That's a child component that based on my selection, I can then decide to kick off my slides, that's a child component, or play my song. And this design pattern, the reason I designed a big parent container and then those child containers was because of my why. because when I sat down to think about what I wanted to show you today, I wanted that silly moment at the beginning where I fired up the scratch org, we hit the green button, some music played, and I could make a fool of myself. And play my slides from Salesforce. So then my design decisions for this component and everything under it came from the one moment I was going for. The other thing my why affected is if we go into that lovely slide presenter component that fired off our slides, that's highlighted here in orange. Anyone notice anything special about my default setting? It's obviously a best practice, right? But it's because I wanted it to work. And, and who's ever worked with content documents? And oh yeah, right, I'm seeing yeah. It's an interesting set of objects to work with. There are some challenges, and the fastest way around it, the fastest way to get my app built and to get it stable and to get it to be something I could use was to go ahead and hard code an ID. When you go look at the default value that's sitting in GitHub, the default value is blank, and it just shows a nice gray box when you upload the code. But then every time I spin up a new scratch org, I just need to upload my attachment, grab the ID, paste it in, push the change up to Salesforce, and it was fine. And it was a good workaround because what I was going for was a moment of fun with y'all, not production, right? So that's the point of that building from why, is it's going to affect all of your decisions. What's optimal? What's an okay workaround? What's absolutely terribly cruddy and an experiment you should never repeat again is going to come from your why. Make sense? So the next thing, I said there were a few different habits, so now I get to dive into my slides. Let's see, so we can remember where we are. So I want to talk about building with courage. So I showed you my why, and I want to show you how I got that song to play. So we'll go back to our presentation helper really quickly. Sorry. And right here, this song helper child component is where some pretty exciting stuff is happening. And we go look at it by digging through more of our files here. You guys are getting an eye full of Salesforce DX. And we can see that this component is pretty simple. There's actually nothing in it except this method that I exposed so that we could kick it off from the parent component. And Philippe, I think, talked about this pattern today. I talked about this pattern in the Lightning Platform session, but this is a great way of making sure that your parent components can communicate to their children, just like an Aura attribute, you can expose a method. And then down here, I have this dynamic markup that just says V body. And what's getting put in that V body is in our controller. If we go look at it, actually I think maybe it's, yes. Right here, I had never worked with this before, and maybe some of you have. This is a dynamically created component. When we hit that button and my controller code calls this, we're writing HTML into the page on demand. Based on the song I chose, we're getting a player component that's rendering. And I'm using some CSS tricks so that we didn't have, say, Katrina and the Waves dancing in front of my slides, but we're dynamically rendering a component. And I didn't know if this would work, and this may be a tremendous hack if we get 10,000 versions of my component running at the same time, but it was something new. And it was the way that I thought maybe I could solve this problem of how do I get sound inside of Salesforce at the same time as this full screen visual. So I tried it. Courage is more obvious because I talked a lot about failure. So I tried and risked something. I couldn't get my component to be a service component, so you'll see in the repo I've sort of repeated code here and there and everywhere. That was me being courageous. But I want to talk next and last about joy, because I think most of all, this is the most important one, and it's the one that I think is the easiest to forget, especially because we work in the real world. There are deadlines, there are sprints you have to make, there are story points and products you have to deliver, and there are people you have to not let down. But building from joy is, I think, how you get to any of the rest of these things. I think joy is what not only makes us creative and makes us valuable, it makes us sustainable. So for me, if we go back to my app, the Launchpad is the last thing I built. Probably not surprising. The first thing I built was this walk-on song previewer. And I spent a long time having a great time with this component. Not only did I have fun with things like, I'm using dynamic buttons. You see, I have the hover over effect and things, and I got to use more, and who doesn't love to make a joke? But, you know, that top header, that's the Einstein prediction builder CSS, which is part of the Salesforce Lightning design system. So if you want to go look at it yourself, you can hack it like I did, and I got rid of Einstein and put in Astro DJ. And I got to use a dynamic icon, so now when we hit the thing, you'll notice the bars move, right? And it's super fun. I had a lot of fun with this component. It's a useless component because you can't actually do anything except watch the videos. Like, my selections there don't touch the Launchpad tab yet. It's a beta. That whole thing about courage, you remember it, right? So the good thing about this component, if we go look at it real quick, my friends who don't read code, thank you for bearing with me. Every pattern I used throughout the rest of this app came from the walk-on song component. I figured out all my problems by having fun. And this is a more complex version of everything. So I have, yes, my Lightning button group with my stateful buttons, and I have all these discrete actions, and you can see here where I've hacked and put in Astro DJ. And if we go look at the controller code, we can see, oh my goodness, these stateful buttons are really chatty and busy. And you can see how I'm getting exactly the times and the selections of the songs I want. I'm calling out to YouTube, and all of those things are here. And in the helper part of my component, I'm doing my dynamic rendering. So I figured out how to render each of those 3 videos, how to control which song I was playing, how to handle all of that logic while having fun. And then when I realized, okay, but you actually have to make something you can show that isn't just you hitting buttons and watching videos and saying, isn't that awesome? I could decompose it, and I could scatter it throughout my app. And I could take every lesson that I learned from my fun component and build an entire application from that. So that's why I think it's important to keep joy in what you're doing. When I was in consulting, I was running teams of developers, and I was often the only one championing building in Lightning, which can be a lonely place, right? And my joy were these events. My joy was coming to have the kinds of conversations you just got to have with each other. The kinds of conversations I watched happening at lunch and in the hall. The community that you're building right now is also a part of that. So I would say, especially when you go home, if your local user group community isn't something you've connected with yet, it's how you keep that joy. These conversations can be had year-round, in your own community or even online. So it's about finding how you can be sustainable and what makes you happy in all of those moments at work, whether it's building a completely useless component on your own time and learning lessons from it, or going to a user group meeting and getting to talk to someone who's not the same people you talk to all day long every day, which can also be a necessary thing. Yes, exactly, therapy. So that's how innovators build, I think. I think we keep connected to our why, which can be sometimes hard to find. I think we show up with courage every day. And I think we keep a hold of why we're doing what we're doing. We have fun, and we have joy. And I want to thank you all for coming here and investing in yourselves, and for sitting and reading through some code with me, which also brings me joy. And I want to thank all of the organizers of dreamOlé. If you are an amazing organizer, I know you're already wearing a gorgeous red shirt, but could you please stand up so that we can recognize you? Yes. Woo! Thank you. And with that, I will make the repo public, and I will turn it over to the team who's going to give you some closing remarks, and that's the bit.ly to get to the repo. So take a picture if you want. Thank you.